50 years from now, how will historians record the times of today? Will the unemployment figures and poverty levels hide the faces of those who are suffering? Will historians merely record the fact that over the past 5 years, over 250 banks collapsed in the United States? Or can the faces of those affected also be recorded? Will statisticians merely state that by the year 2000, 1 million American farms went under? Or will the grief-stricken faces of those who lived and worked the land for generations also be embedded in the history books? Will the records tell the story of 20 million Americans who are hungry today? Or will it merely state that over 15 national studies have concluded that hunger exists in America and in epidemic proportions? Will the archives tell the surplus story? Can the written word explain that while millions go hungry, the grain elevators in this great nation are overflowing and much of the surplus stored will rot before it's used? And while the grain is rotting, taxpayers, some of whom are hungry, are paying over $2 million a day to store this surplus. Will the history books be able to explain this irony? And what about the children? Who will survive to read these books? The children whose fathers were farmers, the children who traveled with their parents from mission to mission in search of food and shelter. How will these hardships affect them? And how will they remember the troubled times of today? Will it be the same? Before this program is over, 5 more family farms will disappear from America's heartland. Farms that have belonged to these families for generations. Why? Because the price for U.S. farm products has been driven so low that those farmers who do put a crop in the ground can't sell that crop and break even. The American family farmer is becoming an endangered species. And current government policy is allowing it to happen by designing farm subsidies that help large corporate farms and do little to help the family farm, those who are truly suffering. Farmers who have never missed a payment are receiving loan acceleration notices and being forced to either pay up or sell out. And for every 5 to 6 farms that go under, a business within that community is forced to shut its doors because the farmers spent a lot of money in town. And without the farmer's dollar, these communities don't function. And while the heartland of America is hurting, our government is subsidizing foreign farmers. History has proven the importance of agriculture to our nation. It was the farm crisis of the late 20s that led the way into the Great Depression of the 30s, and many say the farm crisis of today is much worse than it was then. The American family farm is dying a slow death, and we're allowing it to happen.
I was born in America. I'm proud to be an American. I plan to stay in America. When we pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States, what do we say? Do we say, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States and to the democracy for which it stands? Not on your life. We say, and to the republic for which it stands. Why? People under a republic cannot be made slaves. People under a democracy can be. Why? Because a democracy is run by a bureaucracy. Ask the average politician what America is. What do they say? A republic or a democracy? Invariably, they'll say a democracy. Why? Because that's what we've been changed to be, in order that we can be controlled. But what were we and what were we given by the Founding Fathers? We were given a constitutional republic. The two are as far separated from each other as east is from west. People oftentimes ask me, don't you believe in obeying government? I said, I sure do. Which one? After all, we have 2 forms of government in America today, not one. We have a constitutional republic given us by the Founding Fathers, in which they gave us the great American dream. We have a democracy which has seduced our constitutional republic, which is run by a bureaucracy, is soon to turn into a mobocracy, and has made us we the sheeple instead of we the people. But I think it's time to get back to a constitutional republic and say, I will not be a slave.
They were torn from the land that was nurtured for them. They stood by while strangers and friends bought their souls, and what was theirs for many a year was in minutes torn from their hands. From riches to rags, their heritage divided among many. So let's mourn for their grief and cry for their loss, forever torn from the land.
In 1973, I was the typical head-in-the-sand preacher, as I call myself, on the back cover of my second book, To Seduce a Nation. The reason I say that is because I was a missionary in the state of Alaska that year. 1973 was also the year that they announced they were going to build the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline. They also said that 25,000 pipeliners were going to converge on Alaska to build that pipeline. Well, what better opportunity for a missionary to witness than 25,000 pipeliners who are supposed to be the most wicked, cussingest, drinkingest folks on the face of the earth. So I went to the oil companies and I said, don't you need a chaplain on the pipeline? Well, they allowed me in the pipeline work camps as a chaplain with no pay. Then about 6 months later, the oil company said, you chaplains are saving us thousands of dollars of counseling fees. We've decided to make life a little easier for you since we don't pay you anything. We've decided to give you executive status. I had not the slightest idea what that meant, but I was soon to find out that it meant I could go any place I wanted to, see anything I would like to see, was even invited to sit in on board meetings with the oil company officials in an advisory capacity. I started seeing some things that didn't add up. You see, we all thought there was an energy crisis, didn't we? No, there wasn't. There was no gasoline shortage of any kind in the early 70s. The supposed or alleged gasoline shortage had been intentionally created in advance, not by the government nor by the oil companies. After all, I thought that too before I went to the pipeline. And I oftentimes state that if I had not lived my own story, I would have never believed it. I was seeing things so incredible until I decided someone more credible than I should see and hear what I was seeing. So I invited a senator from the state of Colorado to come to the pipeline. He did, spent a week with me, Senator Hugh Chance. He, by the way, writes the foreword to my first book, The Energy Non-Crisis. Senator Chance spent a week on the pipeline and was given a tour of the oil facility by a senior executive with Atlantic Richfield by the name of Mr. Ken Fromm. After that full day of briefing, questions, answers, rebuttal, Senator Chance, back in my dorm room that night, said, Lindsey, I can hardly believe what I've seen and heard today. And I said, Hugh, what do you mean? He said, Lindsey, only a few weeks ago, I was sitting in the Senate of the state of Colorado when the men came from the Department of Interior in Washington to brief us as state senators on the energy crisis. But he said, Lindsey, from what I have seen and heard here today, I have come to realize that almost everything I was told in that top-level federal briefing in the Senate of Colorado by the men from Washington was the exact opposite to what the truth really is. Undoubtedly, I was intentionally misbriefed. He later wrote the foreword to my book, The Energy Non-Crisis, stating that he had been intentionally lied to in a top-level federal briefing by men from Washington, D.C. That was the first indication I had that we're being controlled. There is an intentional misinformation that is being pumped to the American people by someone. There is a plot, if I may use the word. I don't like the word conspiracy necessarily, but I'll say there is a plot for the control of the people and the economy of the United States of America. I was shaken into reality from what happened with Senator Hugh Chance. After that, the Trans-Alaska Oil Pipeline was over 3 years later. I could not keep quiet with what I knew. I decided to author my first book, The Energy Non-Crisis. It soon put me on the road in speaking engagements all across America in lecture tour. And for the past 6 years, I've lectured nationwide. For instance, a year and a half ago, I was on the road for 7 months solid, averaged 2 speaking engagements per day. Traveling like this, I was able to learn additional things and publish my second book, To Seduce a Nation, which deals with the Constitution and how we are losing our constitutional rights. Then it was time to tell, as Paul Harvey says, the rest of the story.